I never thought my life would shrink down to a single jeepney, but there I was, sitting on the worn vinyl seat, clutching my designer briefcase like it was a life raft, staring at the fluorescent lights of a sleepy provincial road in the Philippines. The air smelled of diesel, fried bananas, and something vaguely floral that I couldn't identify. My assistant had assured me that this ride was perfectly safe. That was before we got lost. Somewhere between the mountains of Baguio and the foggy outskirts of a small town I hadn't heard of, our luxury van broke down. And that's when everything went sideways, or maybe right, depending on your perspective. The driver of the jeepney was a man named Manglito. He looked like he had stories carved into his face, each wrinkle a highway traveled, each sunburn a testament to years on the road. He wore a faded red cap tilted to one side, shorts that had probably survived more monsoons than I'd survived board meetings, and a grin so wide it could have sold beachfront property to the uninitiated. I'd been told he was reliable, which, as it turned out, was a vague guarantee in local terms. "Ma'am, okay, Lang Yan," he said in broken English, glancing at me and the rest of my entourage, like we were fragile porcelain dolls. "This jeepney safe. Overnight, okay, no problem. I protect you." I blinked. He had just said that I could sleep in a jeepney parked on the side of the road overnight, and it would be fine because he promised protection. That was the moment my billion-dollar sense of self-preservation started asking for a refund. "But, Manglito, you do realize I'm a billionaire?" I asked, trying to inject some logic. "I can pay for a hotel, for a security team, for a helicopter pickup." "Surely, ma'am, no need," he interrupted with a wave of his hand. "Hotel expensive, jeepney cozy, very safe. I promise." I looked at my assistant, who shrugged, clearly resigned. "He's right," she said. "Locals trust him. I mean, it's a jeepney. You can take it safer than a jeepney with a Filipino driver's honor on the line." I didn't even know what that meant, but somehow I was about to find out. We moved the jeepney to a small clearing near a cluster of coconut trees. Manglito got out, stretched, and inspected the vehicle like it was a vintage sports car. Perfect. "Here we stay, you sleep. Me watch." He patted the roof of the jeepney, then disappeared into the shadows with a flashlight, presumably to patrol the perimeter. I sat down slowly, feeling the uneven metal floor under my legs. The jeepney smelled faintly of air freshener, sweat, and hope. My assistant set up a small folding chair outside, muttering something about being a human alarm system, while the rest of the entourage argued quietly about whether staying was a good idea. I tried to focus on the positive. At least I wasn't in the middle of nowhere alone. At least Manglito had promised safety. At least I hoped my credit card still had signal. The first hour was oddly peaceful. Fireflies dotted the trees like tiny lanterns. The wind whispered through the leaves, and the occasional bark of a distant dog reminded me that I was, indeed, not alone in the universe. I tried to imagine the scene from a cinematic perspective. Billionaire lost in the Philippines, jungle ambience, local hero with a cap promising protection. It was absurd. And yet, somehow, it felt alive. Around midnight, things started to get interesting. It began with a sound of soft, rhythmic rustling. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it became more deliberate, more human. Or at least humanoid. I clutched my blanket, pretending I wasn't awake, while my assistant peeked out from her chair and whispered, "Probably just a dog or something." "Don't look." I wanted to scream, but somehow the idea of Manglito was comforting. If anything tried to approach, he would, in theory, enforce jeepney law or Filipino honor law, or whatever local contract he had signed with the universe. A shadow moved past the jeepney. A figure, small and hunched, darted behind the trees. My heart thumped like it was trying to escape my chest. I whispered, "Did you see that?" The assistant nodded, eyes wide. "Definitely not a dog." Then a voice, soft and melodic, floated through the clearing. "Excuse me, ma'am." I froze. My billionaire instincts told me to call security. My human instincts told me to faint. My Filipino instincts, though, were being trained quickly by the combination of my assistant whispering, maybe Encanto and Manglito's earlier promise of safety. I poked my head out. A small boy, maybe 8 or 9, wearing flip-flops too big for his feet, stood there with a grin that was both innocent and mischievous. "You sleep here?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. We are staying." "Why?" he asked. "No hotel?" I swallowed. "It's complicated." He giggled. "Ah, jeepney adventure, very Filipino." "You like jeepney adventure?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I guess I do." He nodded sagely, as if he had just confirmed my life purpose. Then he darted away into the shadows, leaving only the sound of his laughter behind. My assistant muttered, "That was either a ghost child or a very brave local." I hope ghost child. The hours passed. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I started to feel the jeepney moving slightly. I thought it was my imagination until Manglito appeared at the back, holding a flashlight like a warrior's sword. "Everything okay?" I asked, half relieved, half terrified. "Ma'am, yes." "I just check." "Nothing near. Jeepney very safe." He winked. "I am like bodyguard." "But cheap." I laughed nervously, unsure if I was meant to find this reassuring. At 4 in the morning, a rooster crowed. Somewhere nearby, a river whispered secrets to the trees. And then, as if on cue, the shadows started moving again. I heard rustling in the undergrowth. Eyes seemed to peer at me from the darkness. I hugged my knees and whispered prayers that felt both absurd and necessary. Manglito appeared again, this time with a small bag. "Breakfast," he said simply, handing me a plate of tapsalog fried beef, garlic rice, and a fried egg. I stared. You brought food?" He nodded. "You stay jeepney. You eat. Very safe. Filipino style. Food makes safe stronger." I laughed, partly from relief, partly from incredulity. Here I was, billionaire in sneakers, eating street-style breakfast in a jeepney at 4 in the morning, and I felt happy. Somehow, Manglito's simple promise of safety and honor had created a cocoon around this absurd little adventure. As the sun began to rise, the forest seemed to shift again. Birds emerged, singing a chorus I didn't recognize. The road ahead, which had seemed narrow and threatening in the dark, now looked like a charming, winding path lined with mango trees. It was almost cinematic, almost magical. Almost like the jeepney had been parked not in a random clearing, but in a secret portal to something between folklore and reality. The rest of my entourage slowly emerged from their tents or sleeping bags, rubbing their eyes. One of my assistants whispered, "I think Manglito actually kept us safe." I nodded. I wasn't sure what exactly he had kept us safe from the forest. Ghosts, or our own overactive imaginations, but there was no denying it. The jeepney had become a haven, and Manglito, for one night, was more than a driver. He was a guardian of the absurd, the magical, and the impossible. Around 7 in the morning, we packed up. I offered Manglito a tip of sum that made my assistant blanch. He waved it off. "Ma'am, no. Tip not needed. Safety first, honor second. Money third." I realized I had learned something in those few hours. Safety in the Philippines was not about wealth, influence, or security systems. It was about trust, respect, and a man's word, even if that man drove a brightly colored jeepney that had seen more decades than most luxury cars. Before we drove off, I looked back at the jeepney, sitting innocently in the morning light, surrounded by coconut trees and chirping birds. For a brief moment, I half expected the shadows to move again, half expected the little boy or some other mischief maker to appear, and half expected the whole place to disappear. But nothing did. Just a jeepney, the smell of diesel, and a small patch of earth that had, for one night, held a billionaire, a few assistants, and a legend of Filipino trust. I climbed into the van that would take us back to the city, feeling oddly grounded. "Maybe I'll tell my friends about this," I said. My assistant chuckled. "They'll think you're crazy." "Maybe," I said. But sometimes being crazy is exactly what it takes to understand the Philippines. Manglito waved as we left, tipping his faded red cap. Behind him, the jeepney seemed ordinary, But I knew better. It had held more than us. It had held trust, courage, humor, and the kind of safety money couldn't buy. And somewhere, I think, the shadows of the night whispered thanks for the billionaire who stayed in a jeepney overnight because one Filipino driver promised it would be safe.